Hello learners, welcome back to the online study session on the Scarlet letter. In this session, we will be reading about the importance of the custom house and why Hawthorne wrote it. When the first draft of the Scarlet letter was about 2/3 complete, Hawthorne set it aside to compose a long introductory sketch. He was concerned that readers would be put off by the unvarying gloom of the novel. He feared that its fantasies and archaisms would not be attractive to readers entranced with realism, at that time of fairly new literary development. His introduction aimed to balance the Scarlet letter with a different kind of writing, more timely, more cheerful, more humorous, more realistic. And the essay developed a context for reading the Scarlet letter. Therefore, it is both a contrast to the novel and an extension of it. Critics over the years have found the custom house a key statement about his general literary aims as well as his particular situation as a writer in mid-19th century America. The Scarlet letter can be read without the custom house can be read without the Scarlet letter, and when read together, however, the two produce a whole that is different from either part. The custom house contains satirical portraits of real people Hawthorne had worked with in the Salem custom house. It alludes rather sharply to his political dismissal. Such topical material naturally interested readers of his day, and this, along with the humor and satire, led many reviewers to prefer it to the Scarlet letter. The major themes of isolation, guilt, decadence, and the sinister power that one person or institution can exercise over another all appear in this short piece. In addition, what is possibly the most important of all of Hawthorne's themes here receives a full treatment. This concept, the most ambiguous of all of those dealt with by Hawthorne, may be expressed in Thoreau's words as the desire to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and not, when I come to die, discover that I had not lived. Like most men, Hawthorne had a number of difficulties of his own concerning the problem of living. He needed money to support his family, he wanted fame, and he wanted to write. His plight was a familiar one of the artist who would like to support himself by his writings, yet never be forced to write for money alone. For such men, few opportunities existed in America during the middle of the 19th century. Virtually all that was available were the public offices that the spoils system had provided for loyal party members since the presidency of Andrew Jackson. In 1839, Hawthorne had made use of this arrangement by accepting a position in the Boston Custom House. Then, after an interlude in Concord, he was appointed by President Polk to be surveyor of the Custom House in Salem. This office he received only after the most assiduous politicking with the Democratic regime and only after turning down a number of offers in the town. He was commissioned on April 3rd, 1846 and took office a few days later. In every way, the appointment seemed appropriate. As he observed in the custom house, the Hawthornes had long lived in Salem and had at one time been prominent citizens of the place. In subsequent generations, they had been less notable, however, and half facetiously, Hawthorne notes that his occupation as a writer was sufficient retribution for the sins of his ancestors. Yet, for Hawthorne, the new position had deeper consequences. As he remarked in the Custom House sketch, he experienced both an attraction and a repulsion towards the town. He therefore felt it almost as a destiny to make Salem his home. Coupled with this observation in his comment that the Hawthornes had always lived in Salem, in respectability, never so far as I have known, disgraced by a single unworthy number. While there is no evidence that Hawthorne felt guilty about his role in the Custom House, there are so many parallels between his account of his stay there and the novel about guilt, for which it serves as a preface, that it is possible that Hawthorne unconsciously projected his own feelings into his account of the trials of Hester Prynne and Arthur Dimmesdale. To be sure, the two pieces are hardly parallel in an exact sense, for the Scarlet Letter is a tale of results or effects. It contains nothing of the relationship between Hester and Dimmesdale prior to the public proclamation of their sin. And it has little to do with the earlier relationship between Hester and Chillingworth. The Custom House sketch, on the other hand, has no dramatic evolution. It was merely the preparatory material for a romance. In Hawthorne's own words, it was merely an account of the petty and wearisome incidents and ordinary characters which he had come to know so well. This material was still too immediate for him to cope with it artistically. The page of life that was spread out before me seemed dull and commonplace only because I had not fathomed its deeper import. If one takes the Custom House as a preface to the Scarlet Letter, not in the literal publishing sense, but in the sense that it parallels the actions of Chillingworth, Dimmesdale, and Hester Prynne in the weeks and months that preceded with their petty and wearisome incidents, the actual beginning of the novel, then I think a certain perspective and more fruitful parallel can be perceived between the two works. Certainly, there are similarities in character studies. Like Hawthorne, both Dimmesdale and Hester were artists of sorts. Hester with the needle, Dimmesdale with the pen. All three had ambivalent feelings towards their locale. Hester and Arthur Dimmesdale both wished to escape from Boston, but like Hawthorne in the sketch, they are somehow doomed to stay. All three are isolated from their communities, if the Custom House may be taken as a microcosm of society comparable to Boston, with its puritanical customs and its patriarchal magistrates who supervise and search out immorality as the inspectors of Salem search for contraband, then the element of isolation may seem more understandable. For it will be remembered that no one in the government office had any idea that Hawthorne was a writer, that is, they knew nothing of his true nature. His original readers did not feel that the Custom House detracted from the effect of the Scarlet Letter, or that its inclusion in the same volume with the longer work was inappropriate. But since much of what Hawthorne had to say about his writing, as well as the particular novel at hand, was articulated through his typical allegorical and symbolical methods, the introduction probably did not offer readers much guidance in understanding the Scarlet Letter. One had to understand Hawthorne in order to understand his intentions as they were explained in the Custom House. On the surface, the Custom House says that Hawthorne did not invent the story of the Scarlet Letter. He found it written up in some old papers on the second floor of the Custom House. He presents himself as the transmitter and editor of someone else's work. In this role, far from retreating from the present back to the past, he is trying to retrieve the past from his readers. He is trying to retrieve the past for his readers, helpfully supplementing the archaic text with commentary and explanation. Of course, the story of discovery is an invention, though not an original one to Hawthorne. The device of presenting a novel as an edition of someone's papers is as old as the novel itself. Trained readers would not have been fooled for an instant. And to make sure that even the most inexperienced among them knew what he was about, Hawthorne wrote, "I must not be understood as affirming that in the dressing up of the tale and imagining the motives and modes of passion that influence the characters who figure in it, I have invariably confined myself within the limits of the old surveyor's half a dozen sheets of foolscap. On the contrary, I have allowed myself as to such points nearly or altogether as much license as if the facts had been entirely of my own invention, says Hawthorne. Hawthorne undermines the veracity of his account of discovering the papers on the second floor of the custom house. But why? Only to lead us to ask, since we are not supposed to believe it, what is the purpose of this invention? Let us therefore look more closely at the extensive preparation that Hawthorne provides in the custom house for this discovery of the Scarlet Letter, symbolically the discovery of his literary subject. This preparation constitutes nothing more than an imaginative autobiographical account of why Hawthorne went to work in the custom house in the first place and what befell him there. Briefly, he says that he returned to Salem and worked in the custom house to satisfy the ghosts of his Puritan ancestors who disapproved of his literary vocation. What is he? Murmurs one grey shadow of my forefathers to the other. A writer of storybooks. What kind of a business in life is this? What mode of glorifying God or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation may that be? Why, the degenerate fellow might as well have been a fiddler. Despite his sincere intentions to put aside writing and engage in the life of his own day and age, Hawthorne found the work boring and the routine deadening. His manhood seemed to be seeping away. The other employees of the custom house, who are described in extended and satirical detail, were as good as dead already. One day, when business was light, he was browsing through old papers in the upper story and found a manuscript wrapped around a rag of scarlet cloth, which on inspection proved to be the letter A, finely embroidered with gold thread. The letter intrigued him. Certainly, there was some deep meaning in it, most worthy of interpretation, and which, as it were, seemed forth from the mystic symbol, subtly communicating itself to my sensibilities, but evading the analysis of my mind. Having read through the Scarlet Letter, we shall be pleased but not surprised to find the motive of meaning and interpretation introduced simultaneously with the letter. The papers in which the letter was wrapped turn out to contain the outlines of the story of a woman's life, the woman cagely described as one who appeared to be rather a noteworthy personage in the view of our ancestors. Hawthorne accepted what he interpreted as a summons from the long-dead writer of these papers, the obligation to work up her story for publication. Unfortunately, the oppression of life in the custom house was so great that he could not carry out his promise. An entire class of susceptibilities and a gift connected with them of no great richness or value, but the best I had was gone from me. Not until he was dismissed from the custom house did he find himself able to write the story. Thus, traumatic though it was to lose his job, it had the result of restoring him to his true vocation. While the press carried on over his decapitation, Hawthorne, with his head safely on his shoulders, had made an investment in ink, paper, and steel pens, had opened his long discussed writing desk, and was again a literary man. Hawthorne's story ends with his departure from Salem and his successful completion of the story of the Scarlet Letter. Among several points worthy of notice in considering this imaginary autobiographical narrative, perhaps the most important in connection with the Scarlet Letter is its structural duplication of Hester's situation. Like Hester, Hawthorne is in conflict with Puritans. They disapprove of what he does and mark him internally with their disapproval. He attempts to conform his life to their rules and to adopt their judgments. But his attempt fails. Try as he may, he cannot share their estimate of his literary ambitions, and he is increasingly aware that what they would define out of his existence is nothing less than the very principle of that existence. To accept their judgments, to live by their law, is to die. The upper story of the custom house can be seen as analogous to the forest, where there is an escape from human law. Hawthorne's fascination with the letter can be understood as his intuitive understanding that it is his letter, and indeed, while wondering about its import, he accidentally, of course, puts it on his breast. It seemed to me then that I experienced a sensation not altogether physical, yet almost so, as of burning heat, and as if the letter were not of red cloth, but red hot iron. At this moment, Hester and Hawthorne, whose shared initial may not be merely coincidence, are identified as the same person. Come to think of it, isn't it Hector, like Hawthorne, an artist? And isn't Hawthorne's book, which he had hoped to publish with a red A on the cover, his defiant answer to the Puritans? A double answer in that it represents his return to a despised profession and, moreover, the commitment of his art to the defense of an outcast woman. In pursuit of this analogy, we can even go so far as to suggest that leaving Salem and publishing the Scarlet Letter are equivalent to Hester's leaving Boston and bringing Pearl to adulthood as a citizen of somewhere else. If the custom house identifies Hester with her creator, we have to suppose that the Scarlet Letter carries an intense autobiographical charge. As a story, it embroiders and beautifies, and at length and irresistibly it justifies Hester's A. As a work of literature, it is Hawthorne's defense of himself and his art. And this art proceeds from a deliberate, long-gestured decision to reject the right of those in authority to determine the course of his life by imposing their normal judgments on him. In defending his right to live against the right of authorities to tell him how to live, Hawthorne works within the same personal and emotive domain as Hester does at first. But just as her personal situation leads her to ever more general and abstract ideas, so Hawthorne's personal situation as the artist in the custom house is susceptible to generalization. Hawthorne in the custom house is interpretable symbolically as a representation of the situation of the artist in America. For by the middle of the 19th century, the nation was vigorously representing itself in the press and in public oratory as devoted to business, free enterprise, the practical, the useful. And as a democracy, it was very much attuned to consensus and conformity. The savagery of Puritan intolerance was a thing of the past, but the individual who stood out in a crowd was still seen not merely as different, likely as blameworthy for being so. The person who, in an energetic commercial society, prefers to create works of art, who dreams instead of calculating, feels stigmatized for that preference. Perhaps we see here some explanation of Pearl's return to Europe, as well as her marriage to an aristocrat, which accidentally is another A word. In the old world, marks of difference can be marks of distinction. The artist has no place in the custom house. That is Hawthorne's symbolic statement. In defending himself, then, Hawthorne suggests that the democratic and commercial American nation has found no place for the artist, has indeed excluded the artist from its roll call of legitimate citizens. We can go further still in such an interpretation and take the artist himself or herself as personifying the human qualities that art requires for its creation, that is, creativity, originality, imagination, the love of beauty. And then the custom house proposes that the nation has no place or respect for such qualities. The essay becomes a passionate defense of the imagination and creativity in a country that has no use for them. Because Hawthorne is standing up for pure imagination, he rejects the compromise that is available to artists in America, which is to write realistic works. Work of this sort makes imagination serve the real world, enforcing its claim upon us, making us forget how much our own fantasies have entered into the construction of what we accept as objective reality. Hawthorne provides some samples of realistic writing in the custom house in his description of his colleagues. Therefore, we know that when he writes a piece like the Scarlet Letter, it is not because he is incapable of literary realism, it is a matter of choice. A true defense of imagination calls for a total commitment. And under the circumstances, how ironic it is that these same descriptions were thought by some to be superior to the Scarlet Letter. Ironic, or perhaps only what Hawthorne would have expected. To some degree, the stance that he takes in this custom house is more utopian than that adopted by Hester at the end of the Scarlet Letter. She brought the community around partly by investing herself in altruistic deeds of social service, whereas Hawthorne takes a stand on nothing short of absolute dedication to his art. On the one hand, he seems to want to imply that any notion that there is only a real world is self-delusion. On the other, that such a world could quite possibly come into existence, but it would be totalitarian. These two apparently incompatible statements can be reconciled at another level of discourse by understanding that a totalitarian society has simply granted all authority to its own particular fantasies and outlawed everybody else's. Outlawed fantasies acquired tremendous destructive force. Witness the devil in the forest. A society more open to imaginative variety is at once a richer, more satisfying place to live, and a safer, ironically, a more substantial one. The survival of a real world depends upon the survival of imaginative freedom within it. Artists serve the world and the democratic cause, after all, by declaring their independence from majority rule. So the custom house then is very much able to exist on its own as an autobiographical draft, as a draft which shows Hawthorne's capabilities as a realistic writer. But then on the other hand, it also serves as a preface to the novel that we are about to enter. And it is significant for us to note over here that how Hawthorne intertwines the realistic and the psychological in the custom house. He is giving us an instance into his own life. He is giving us a picture, a peep into his own autobiographical details and the life that he led. At the same time, by providing us with the autobiographical details, he is opening up the window to the mid-19th century America. And then he introduces us to his characters with whom he shares a certain kind of familiarity. And surprising as it is, when we read the novel, we find a similar kind of structure being repeated, wherein Hawthorne gives you the character sketch of a character, introduces us to a character, and yet places that character into the history of that place and that time. So then the piece, the custom house, works on various levels. It works as a preface, it works as an autobiographical detail, but it also works as a piece of historical document which gives us a glance of the American history. And then the novel at a larger level also works as a historical piece because it continues to give us the conditions of America in the mid 19th century. And apart from this, the Custom House preface also works beautifully well as a psychological document because he provides us a window into the inner state of Hawthorne himself and also into the innermost lives of the men working at Custom House. And then we see the similar structure being repeated in the Scarlet Letter as well, wherein Hawthorne reveals the inner world of all of his characters. So it is as if the custom house is working as a microcosm of the novel, the world presented in the novel, and of the America that Hawthorne was living in. Like I started the lecture with, the custom house is very much capable of existing as an individual piece, which may give you a certain kind of details, a certain kind of insight. But when we combine the custom house with the Scarlet Letter, it gives another dimension to the novel and further enhances our understanding of the novel, the characters, and of the author himself. And by understanding the intentions of the author, it becomes easier for the readers to understand his work at large. So it is almost as if that Hawthorne has provided us with a key to unlock his text. That is how I would like to explain the significance of the custom house. Thank you.